Today we're going to be exploring the inconsistent punishment of fighters by the UFC. From lifetime bans to seemingly no consequences at all, we'll discuss why the inconsistency exists, its implications on the sport, and whether the UFC can make any improvements. Over the years, the UFC has been criticized for its inconsistent punishment for fighters who break rules or engage in unsportsmanlike conduct. On one hand, we've seen some fighters receive lifetime bans, like Paul Daly for his post-fight sucker punch of Josh Koscheck, and Jason High for shoving a referee. On the other hand, we've seen cases where fighters who have engaged in violent behavior outside the octagon received minimal or even no punishment at all. For instance, Conor McGregor's infamous bus attack in 2018, which left multiple fighters injured, resulted in no suspension from the UFC. Instead, he was fined and faced legal consequences. Similarly, Jon Jones has had multiple run-ins with the law, including a hit-and-run incident and multiple drug offenses, yet he has continued to compete with the UFC. There are several factors contributing to the inconsistency in punishments handed out by the UFC. One of the most significant factors is the promotion's reliance on star power. High-profile fighters like Conor McGregor and Jon Jones have a massive following and generate substantial revenue for the organization. This may lead the UFC to be more lenient with their punishments in order to keep these big names on their roster and maintain their marketability. Another factor is the subjective nature of determining appropriate punishments for various offenses. Since there is no standardized system in place, the UFC often handles these cases on a case-by-case basis. This can lead to inconsistencies, as different decision makers might have different perspectives in each individual case. The UFC's inconsistent approach to punishing fighters has implications on the sport as a whole. First, it can lead to a perceived lack of fairness, as fighters who commit similar offenses may receive vastly different punishments. This can be frustrating for both the athletes and the fans, who may lose faith in the organization's ability to uphold the integrity of the sport. Second, this inconsistency can create a perception that the UFC prioritizes profits over the welfare of its fighters and the values of the sport. By allowing high-profile athletes to escape severe punishment, the UFC may inadvertently send a message that some fighters are above the rules, as long as they generate enough revenue for the organization. This can damage the UFC's reputation and ultimately harm the sport. Lastly, the inconsistent punishment can set a dangerous precedent for aspiring fighters. They may feel that they can engage in unsportsmanlike conduct or break the rules without facing serious repercussions, especially if they reach a certain level of stardom. This can lead to a deterioration of sportsmanship and respect within the MMA community as a whole. In order to address these inconsistencies and improve the perception of the sport, the UFC should consider implementing a standardized punishment system. This could involve creating a disciplinary committee made up of impartial individuals who would be responsible for reviewing incidents and determining the appropriate punishments based on a set of established guidelines. These guidelines could include a range of penalties for various offenses, taking into account factors such as the severity of the infraction, the fighter's prior history, and any mitigating circumstances. By having a transparent and consistent framework in place, the UFC would ensure that all fighters are held accountable for their actions, regardless of the star power. Another potential solution is for the UFC to work more closely with athletic commissions and other regulatory bodies. By collaborating with these organizations, the UFC can ensure that punishments are not only consistent within their own organization, but across the sport as a whole. This collaboration could involve sharing information, discussing appropriate disciplinary actions, and providing support to ensure that fighters who engage in unsportsmanlike conduct face meaningful consequences